Welcome, everyone. We're going to be doing our virtual tasting for our Old Vine Zinfandel vertical today. I'm so glad you could join us. My name is Sarah Rathbun. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at Dry Creek Vineyard, and I'm joined by our winemaker, Tim Bell, today. I am just thrilled that we could bring this virtual tasting back. This was one of our most popular virtual tastings that we did during 2020. And, this one's kind of a special one for us because we don't have a lot of inventory of past vintages laying around. So we set aside a certain amount.
Cal, turn the thing down, they're on.
There we go. So we set aside a certain amount of these verticals so that we can do things like this and so that we have them available for special things like the holidays. So I'm very excited if you were able to get one of these verticals, that you have something really special in your hands. And I can't wait to hear Tim's approach to it. I'm going to go ahead and keep everybody on mute for now so that we can really concentrate on what Tim's saying and not have too much going on in the background. I do encourage you to use the chat button down below. I'll be checking those questions, and if I can answer them, I will. Otherwise, I'll make sure that we get to Tim and hear his answer on them. We also have the live transcript button available. So if you want to have the electronic version of our voices kind of coming and captioning whatever it thinks we're saying, please utilize that as well. Without further ado, then, I will hand it over to our winemaker, Tim Bell.
Welcome, everyone. It's really great to see you. And I love these. I get very energized by getting to taste these wines with you and getting to interact with you with all your questions. And please, I would encourage you to get the questions going about anything that you want to know about these wines tonight, or even winemaking in general, perhaps. As I often do, I like to start with kind of where we're at in the winemaking year. And here at the winery, we have a little bit more of bottling to get done. And like always, we wish we were already done because harvest draws close, but we always seem to have a little bit of overlap between harvest and bottling. And every year we say we're not going to do it that way next year. But we're making so many darn different wines for you guys, and we want to be really careful about every one. So we're taking the time to get it right. And we really love the chance to really dig in and do these small lots for you that are very special. Talking about what's going on at the winery, besides having some more bottling to do, so we're working through some final blends. We've gotten all the Zinfandels and all the whites done, other than Chardonnay. Chardonnay will be coming later this month, but then we have some of the 2019 Bordeaux style reds still to bottle. So that's wines based on Cabernet, Merlot, and all the associated varieties with that. And then we've had quite a bit of construction work going on at the winery, different things going on. Most importantly, some work on the insulation on our tanks. So sort of, refurbishing some insulation there. And that's kind of dragged on a lot longer than it was supposed to. And so we can't use the tanks until it's done. So we're watching the sugars and the grapes and with one eye and the construction with the other. And speaking of sugars and grapes, I was out in the vineyards today doing some sampling. We're starting to look at Sauvignon Blanc because that's our first grape variety that will come in. That's the earliest ripening variety that we work with. And so not quite there yet, but probably, by, I'd say, let's see. So this is the first full week of August, right? So in another 2 weeks, 2.5 at the most, I'm pretty sure we'll be starting to see some Sauvignon Blanc crossing the scale. And so here we go. We got to get ready. And there's a lot of excitement kind of brewing around the winery right now within my team because we got to get ready. And the other thing that we're kind of going through in the vineyard is, as this photo will show you, is veraison. So this is the process where the fruit is starting to color up and starts to soften and starts to rapidly accumulate sugar, and the acid, which starts out very high, starts dropping. So all those different things are happening simultaneously. And so these photos that Sarah's put up here are pretty accurate about where things are right now in the vineyards, especially Zinfandel. Like I was just walking the Wallace Ranch vineyard right here at the winery a couple days ago, and we've got some fruit just like this. We've got some that's pretty colored up. We've got some that's still pretty pale, and even a few bunches that are mostly still green. So it's but it's happening pretty rapidly. So within another couple of weeks, it'll probably all be dark fruit all across the way. So another harvest is definitely coming. There are rumors of an early start, but so far I haven't heard any confirmed rumors that anybody's actually started picking yet, other than still wine producers are maybe picking or are very close. So anyhow, that's kind of where we're at in the winery. And so actually, maybe I'll go ahead and address a question that we got ahead of time, since I was just mentioning the insulation on our tanks. So there was a question about, I think it was kind of like what we're doing, why is that important? You can tell me if I missed that, Sarah. But essentially, most of our tanks are outdoors, and so we want to keep the wine at a good temperature. So typically, we don't want it. For storage, we don't want it any warmer than 60 degrees. So maybe somewhere between 58 to 60 degrees, and sometimes we want it colder. And you can imagine that and all the tanks have what we call a jacket. So it's basically like a radiator in your car. We circulate some fluid through there that's very, very similar to what's in your car's radiator. It doesn't touch the wine. It's just on the outside of the tank. And there's a sheet metal, or there's a stainless steel metal between that and the wine. So it's kind of this other outer chamber. Circulate the cool fluid through there, and that can cool down the wine and to maintain the correct temperature. And also vital during fermentation, because then the yeast are building up so much heat. We have to kind of keep the temperature down, or they'll get too hot. The wine can't shed the heat fast enough, and it would actually end up damaging the yeast, and the fermentation would stop before it was complete. So pretty important thing. And so, to minimize the energy input, we have really nice thick foam insulation. It's like 3 or 4 inches of foam insulation around each of these tanks. And you can imagine in a winery that's coming up on its 50th anniversary that, the tanks are showing a little wear and tear. And so we've, starting in 2019, we've been going through a process of going through all the different tanks, and have a company that specializes in this come through and do all the repairs and recoat and repaint the tanks. And then they end up looking really beautiful and great at the end of the process. And, during the whole process, it's all, they've got masking and tape and plastic everywhere to protect it from, everything else from the spray. And we don't want to get it inside the tanks. And we've had to empty all the tanks from wine. So the tanks are all empty during this process. But it looks like, a bomb went off or something. It just looks really ugly. And today they were starting to take all the masking tape and plastic sheets and tarps on the floor away. And I walked outside, and one of the guys in the cellar said, "Hey, we have a brand new winery," because that's what it looks like. It looks really great now. So I don't know, tidy winery makes you feel like you want to keep it tidy. So it's pretty cool. So enough about the nuts and bolts of equipment. I think we should dive into starting to taste some of our wines. So we're having this vertical, small vertical here of our Old Vine Zinfandel, and by vertical we just mean we're tasting successive vintages. So we've got the 2017, 2018, and 2019. I just went through these just before we started here, and I think they're all tasting really good. It's going to be really fun to taste and compare and contrast these wines. Give you a little bit of background first on our Old Vine Zinfandel. So we actually were the first winery to use that term. We came up with it back in the mid 80s. And one of our longtime employees, Gary, who's been here, I don't know, 30, 35 years, maybe more, 40, I'm not sure. But he's a fixture. And, he came up with this term. And the first vintage was actually, unusually enough, a mix of 2 vintages. So this is the label of that very first Old Vine Zinfandel, and it was a blend of 1985 and 1986 wines. And so, it's just an acknowledgement that these old vineyards, most of them in this area have been here since before Prohibition, so some before the turn of the century, and they're just these great gems. The vines stopped putting out as much fruit, and of course, over the years, some vines are replanted here and there. So it's an average age when we talk about the age of the vineyard. If we say it's 120 years old, well, that's when it was first planted, and there's probably some vines out there that are still originals, but there's others that are a little bit younger. They might be 80 years old or even 50 years old. For us, we like to not call a vineyard Old Vine unless the vineyard is 50 years old or older. And so that actually means, some vineyards that were planted like back in the 70s, like part of Vogelson, which is, a single vineyard Zinfandel we make. Some of that is actually moved into Old Vine status as well. And we use a little bit of those old head-trained vines of Vogelson in these blends as well. This is a shot of Beeson Ranch, which has been one of our key Old Vine vineyards. And we've got others that we'll talk about as we go through these wines. And you can see when these vines get old, they get bigger in girth. They put on a little more wood every year, so they get thicker and pretty gnarled and kind of become these wonderful living sculptures. It's, for me, I was really taken with the image of that one of the vineyard managers talked to me about in an Old Vine vineyard once. He said, people used to work this with horses and plows in the 1800s, and we're here working on these vines today. And I thought that was a pretty amazing thought, and a really gives you a connection to the vineyard and the history of the place. And anyhow, makes me feel really good to be working with these old vines. What we think makes these Old Vine wines so special is several things. One is that, the age of the vines, they put out less fruit, but it's a little more concentrated. So you maybe get some more intensity. And sometimes just any vineyard needs a few years of producing grapes before it produces its best fruit. In a very much smaller scale, and a totally different variety. We planted, I think it was around 2010, we planted some new clones of Sauvignon Blanc at our DCB3 vineyard, and one of them was the Sauvignon Gris. And I gotta be honest, the first few years I wasn't sure I was that excited about it, but the last 3, 4, 5 vintages, it's really brought on a lot of character, and I've seen that in a younger vineyard in the past too. Like a new Petit Syrah vineyard when I was working at another winery, and we again, it wasn't that exciting for the first 2 or 3 vintages, and then it really came into its own and started producing some amazing fruit. So that age of the vineyard and the lower yields and the intensity of the fruit is one of the things that's special. And then the fact that a lot of these vineyards are field blends. So what we mean by that is it's primarily Zinfandel fruit, but there are some other varieties mixed in these vineyards. So places like Beeson that we showed, and others like we have Buchignani, a longtime family growing here, and Forchinis. It's Zinfandel, but there'll be a little bit of other varieties mixed in, and it's a lot of times it's random. We don't really know how that came about or why that was sort of done in that random fashion, but you'll see some Petit Syrah mixed in, different varieties like Carignan, Mourvedre, Grenache, Alicante Boucher, just a lot of different things. And some like Beeson Ranch has, sometimes you'll see a little bit of white grapes, like Beeson Ranch has like 2 or 3 vines of Trousseau Gris, which is a kind of a lesser known white grape. And Negrette, which is a kind of more obscure red grape that actually looks a lot like Zinfandel, just a little bit lighter in color. So that mix really gives each vineyard its own personality, because you might have 5 or 10 of those vines in one vineyard and 25 in another, and if you pick it all together, nature is really determining kind of the character each year from that particular vineyard or that block. So those things, along just with the fact that the really cool history, we think it's pretty amazing that we're working with these really old vines. That all that stuff together makes these vines really special, and we feel really honored to be working with those. So probably enough talking. Maybe we should start tasting some wine. How about that?
I think we have some thirsty people. And so will we be starting with the 2017 vintage to go
yeah,
on to the
so
newest? And why would we do that?
Yeah, so when we do these vertical tastings, I always like to start with the older vintage and work our way up to the younger. These are so close in vintage. We don't have a super wide spread here. Like, if we had 10 or 15 years apart in age, you'd see the difference in age more distinctly. But I like to start with the older ones because your frame of reference sort of adjusts as you go into younger and younger wines. And if you start with the youngest one first, and then you go to wine that is like 10 years older, it smells and tastes kind of funny to you because your perception was sort of adjusted to this really young wine, and it kind of throws you off. So I like to go the other direction. And so we'll start with the 2017 Old Vine Zinfandel. I'm going to give it another fresh smell and taste here. So what I get from this wine is some really beautiful ripe boysenberry. It can definitely tell it's got some ripe fruit with it, and I also know from the 2017 vintage that it was a riper vintage. We'll go into that a little bit, but some really nice ripe fruit and a nice blend of spices. There's like cumin and maybe even a little coriander and some pepper. Maybe more like white pepper, but then in the flavor you get a lot of that ripe fruit and maybe a little chocolate, just a hint of that, and some nice black pepper that comes in the finish. And that spiciness is a characteristic of Dry Creek Valley Zinfandel in particular, and these Old Vine vineyards and this blend. Definitely, it's always a really important character, and I've gotten that tasting through all these today, a lot of that spice. So about the 2017 vintage. So this was a year that we had warmer weather, and there was actually a heat spell right before harvest. So right at the end of August, the last 2 days of August, as I recall, the first 3 days of September, we had a heat wave. And so it really, put us into high gear with harvest. So we had to, we were still harvesting Sauvignon Blanc, and, we're just hadn't gotten started on Zinfandel until the heat wave. So that, August 31st was the first picking of Zinfandel for this Old Vine blend. And we had to do a lot of grapes very quickly so that the sugars didn't get too high and get past us. So made for some long days. And it does concentrate the grapes a little bit more. This was of these three vintages was the highest sugar. It was in the 26.8, I believe it was. And but interestingly enough, as I did some sort of things to compare and contrast these three vintages, we actually the harvest of these Old Vine vineyards for the 2017 was spread over a period of 24 days, whereas with the 2018 and the 2019 vintage, which were both cooler, it was only over 19 days. So go figure, hotter vintage, but we still took longer to pull in the fruit. And 2019 was a big year too. So you can't just say that it was, we couldn't process it fast enough in 2017. But it's just, every vineyard at the right time. Talk just a little bit about the oak treatment too. All of these are very similar in the amount of new oak. So they're all either 27 or 28% new oak. So it's a somewhat restrained amount of new oak, which I really like, especially with Zinfandel. So we really let the flavors and the spice of the wine shine and stand forward. And, the oak is a subtle, flavor underneath that helps support that. And you get a lot of the benefits of oak aging. With the new oak barrels, you get more oxygen into the wine, and that's has some benefits too. And when it comes in very, very small amounts. as we go through each of these wines, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the vineyards. There's most of the vineyards they're pretty much all the same. The 2017 is the one vintage that has a little bit of fruit, about 6%, from a vineyard called Kowalski, and that was the last vintage that we actually used that vineyard. And I feel very sad about that. It was a small vineyard and was owned by someone who really just didn't have the time or the resources and ultimately the health, unfortunately, to put into farming the vineyard. So after 2017, he gave up farming, and we weren't able to get that vineyard anymore. But would love to have that fruit if it was still in production. But the biggest portion of the 2017 vintage came from the Buchignani vineyard. And the Buchignanis are a family that farm some vineyards at the north end of the valley. So that's a hotter end of the valley. We're cooler down at the southern end. And so any vineyards that are up in the north end get picked earlier typically. And they are always one of the first Zinfandel vineyards to come in. They and Forchini. Forchini is actually a little south of them, but something about the soil there, the grapes ripen very rapidly there. So Buchignani is just under 60% of the blend. It's actually a pretty major part of the blend. And then, like our old friend Forchini is about 20%, Bogenson 10%, and Beeson was a very small part of this year. It was only about 6%. So kind of unusual that there was that little bit of Beeson in this vintage. So I'll just take a pause and see, are there any questions that have come through specific to this wine?
Not for this wine yet. People seem to be very interested in future virtual tastings, though. So I will touch on those at the end of this because I know people are excited about that. But not as yet. Everyone's being quiet so far.
Well, and I'll just add, when I was talking about tasting this wine, the one thing I didn't add is just how round and sort of almost voluptuous this is. It's just very, very smooth and round and very pleasant to drink. So, it'll certainly, I think, age well for probably, another 5 to 8 years, if, maybe even a little longer if you have a good cellar. But man, it's hard to resist this one right now.
So Tim, I was wondering, when it comes to picking out, food and wine pairings, that's what we always talk about. This one's a little bit different because you're basically having Old Vine Zinfandel 3 times over. Do you think that there's differences in the wine that would change what you pick to eat with each of them?
It's a good question. So, this 2017, the first thought that came to me actually is I'm almost tempted to put some really nice cheese with it, like a, sort of milder blue veined cheese or something, or even maybe like an aged Gouda or something like that. But I think I would almost go with the 2018 and the 2019 with food. And if I was going to serve the 2017 with something besides cheese, but if you just have the cheese and the wine, you can really enjoy both and just focus on both. But if I was going to serve some food with it, I might go with maybe some kind of grilled beef. Maybe it could even be a steak, but not a super heavy seasoning. Something with just kind of maybe some salt and pepper, and maybe a tiny dash of soy sauce or something, and you kind of just let the wine shine and have this really beautiful beef that goes with it. So, or maybe some grilled mushrooms, like grilled portobellos might be a really nice match for that too.
Good point. And now I'm hungry. Doris was wondering what the soil makeup is of the wine, which means she's a true Dry Creek Vineyard fan because she knows that we love talking about soil. So
yeah, so let me rack my brain here. So I know that like at Buchignani and Forchini, for example, they have a lot of a soil series called Manzanita loam, and so they share some characteristics in common, and it's basically fairly deep soil, but rocky, so fairly well drained. But these vineyards are dry farmed, so it does retain enough moisture below the surface to help the vine, make it through. And when I go visit Andrew Forchini, I've talked about him in the past. He's a very passionate farmer and likes to talk about what he does and get really into it. And more than once I've seen him get down on his hands and knees while we're out there in the vineyard, and he starts scrabbling through the soil, digging down with his hands and saying, see, look, there's moisture right there. He wants to show me that his soil is doing really well as a dry farm vineyard. And yeah, there's usually a little moisture about, 5-6 inches down below there. So, and it's kind of a loose, red, fluffy soil. So there's some good iron content in the soil as well. The Forchini and Bucagnani vineyards that I mentioned, trying to think if I'm leaving anybody out. So they're both on the bench, so on the east side of the valley. So what we call the Dry Creek bench, or the eastern bench. It's a higher elevation than the valley floor, like down closer to the creek in the valley. And so that higher elevation soil is a little more well drained, not as vigorous, doesn't produce as vigorous of vines as you would down on the valley floor, but still has good vigor, that works really well for those dry farm vineyards. And then vineyards like Vogelston and Beeson, they're on the hills on the western side of the valley, so some much steeper slopes, because even Bucagnani and Forchini, for example, they have some nice sort of rolling hills, but not super steep slopes. But you get on the west side of the valley, you get steeper slopes, rockier vineyards, even more iron content in those vineyards. And like Beeson, it's kind of at a lower elevation, and it has a natural spring that kind of runs through it, and so that helps it last as a dry farm vineyard. Whereas Vogelston is higher elevation on a mountain. It's like 800,000 feet or whatever, and they do use a little bit of irrigation on those old vines because it is such a rocky soil and it doesn't retain moisture as much. So
yeah, and this picture is from Beeson, just to give an idea of just kind of some rocks that are around the top, just from an area that Don and I went out and were looking for kind of the quintessential photo of Beeson soil, just for those who are interested.
Yeah, and you can see definitely the rock content. Sometimes when you're disking or plowing a vineyard, you think you're growing rocks because you keep pulling up rocks every time you go through the vineyard. And some, not super dark, rich soil, but it's dark enough and rich enough. You can tell there's some good grape growing ground there. So yeah. So I think I'll move on to the 2018. Let's give that wine a taste here.
Interesting when you were mentioning the 2017 harvest being so fast. I remember that was our the first harvest at Dry Creek Vineyard for our associate winemaker, Brian Pruitt, which some people
Right.
might know from some events. And I remember him about a week or two in saying, "Is it always like this?" Because it was just so fast and furious right at the beginning.
And the answer is yes. It's always like this, Brian.
But he's still here. That's the key.
And he's still here. Hey. Yeah, so 2018. So, the one thing we didn't talk about is kind of the amount of Zinfandel in these blends too. So it actually, the 2017 was only 76%, and then we're up at 79 or 78% for the 2018 and 2019. And, typically the majority of the rest of the blend is Petit Syrah, and then we always have a little bit of Carignan. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. So, 2018, it was a little bit cooler vintage. And so whereas 2017 harvest started on August 31st, the 2018 harvest started on September 8th. And another thing that I noticed too, in comparing the winemaking notes for these two vintages, is that in the 2017, we didn't keep the grapes on their skins for very long, only like 10 to 12 days, which is kind of on the short end of where we typically are. So when we're fermenting red wines, we ferment with the skins. All the color and a lot of the tannin that we like that builds some structure and body comes from those skins. Some of the tannin can come from the seeds as well. But, the skins during fermentation, the CO2 floats them to the top. So we got to, pump the wine over and percolate it down through the skins. to get more color and extraction and make a better wine that way. And it also helps cool off the wine and keep the cap from getting too vinegary. There's a lot of benefits to that. And so the length of time on the skins can have some effect in that too. You get most of your color up front in the first few days, but then tannin is kind of a slower process. And even though I've learned from my winemaking, my academic winemaking background, at Davis, that the color, they say, comes out really fast. I still swear there's some vintages where it's slower, and maybe it's just the tannin more than the color, but you gotta sometimes in a cooler, maybe like this cooler vintage of 2018 and even 2019, work the cap a little more aggressively and longer. So when I mean working that, is like how much time you're spending pumping it over, and how vigorously. And so, 2018 was more of that way, where we left the grapes on the skins from as little as 12 days, which was kind of the high end for 2017, to as much as 17 days. So over 2 weeks on the skins. And typically the Petit Syrah would be at the low end, because it has so much tannin, we don't want to over extract that and get it too dry and puckery. But the Zinfandel typically doesn't have that problem. So, a little more time on the skin, have some patience, and build up the structure and the wine, the mouthfeel, and the richness and body that we want. So the lead vineyard in this 2018 was again the Bucagnani vineyard, but it was only about 50%. And then there was more Voganson, more Beeson in this, and more Forchini. So they all kind of contributed more to this blend. I mentioned Carignan. So we do have a vineyard I haven't talked about called Hamar Ranch that has some Old Vine Carignan, and actually a little bit of Old Vine Zinfandel that we get too. So sometimes we use a little bit of that Old Vine Zin in this blend, and almost always the Carignan. And the reason I've taken to do that is Carignan, I know, has always been a variety that you would find in these old field blend vineyards mixed in with a Zinfandel. And it can look fairly similar to Zinfandel, but once you get to recognize it in the field, you can tell the difference, and the vines tend to be really big. There's these old giants standing out in the vineyard. And I was looking for Old Vine Zinfandel back in 2013, and we found the small block of it in Hamar Ranch. And then in passing, the person showing me the vineyard said, "Oh, and this is an old vine block of Carignan planted in 1904. And I kind of said, stop the car, let's go take a look. And we ended up buying that fruit and have continued to get that fruit now. And that's part of this blend. I really like it as a blender. It's less spicy than Zinfandel, but has some really good color and body, and just adds some nice fruit to the blend. So it's a small piece, but an important piece. Only about 1%, I think, in 2018, 1 or 2%. So and typically it's around that 2 to 3% range in each Old Vine blend. I didn't talk about the flavors and aromas of this wine, I don't think. So, like the 2017, it gets some of that nice boysenberry, but maybe some black cherry fruit as well. The spice and the aroma to me was a little more subtle, but when you put it in your mouth, it comes on very strong. The other thing I got aromatically that was different for me in the 2018 was just a little bit of like a dried herb, maybe a little bit of like dried thyme. And I thought that was an interesting difference. And it's something you can definitely get in Zinfandel as well. And so, kind of showing you just the differences that the vintage brought. Honestly, I thought that I was going to find the 2017 was a lot thicker and richer than the 2018 or 2019. But to me, right now, tasting them side by side, I don't see a huge difference. There's probably some subtle difference there, but I expected with these cooler vintages that it was going to be lighter bodied wines, but I'm not sure it really played out that way. So you never really know. That's why you make the wine, and every year it's like, okay, we got another chance to get this right.
And then was there anything different with the barrels on this one as opposed to the 2017? Or you said they were pretty standard with the new oak between them, but did you play around at all?
Well, every year we've got, we're always playing around with different barrels and different toasting styles, and different wood and toasting styles. But the overall mix of barrels between 2017 and 2018 is pretty similar. Like I said, it's well, so I'm going to look here. So 2017 was 28% new oak. Same thing for 2018. Same percentage of new oak, and French was the primary amount. So, between 10% in 2017 to 13% in 2018, and then Hungarian was the next most prevalent, and then American oak was the final component of that. And that's pretty typical of what we would see for this wine. When we get to the 2019, French is still the main component. Hungarian, yeah. So it's very similar. They're pretty similar overall. Now, if you looked at the exact barrels and toasts, there would definitely be some differences. So, like 2017, we used most of our French oak was one from particular cooperage, Loire, which I really love for Bordeaux reds. We don't typically use it a lot on Zinfandel, but we did, and it worked really nicely in 2017. Whereas in 2018, the French oak was some other cooperages like we had Demptos and Doreau, really fine sort of Burgundy style cooperage. So different producers, and they all have their different profiles.
Great. Yeah, I just know we've gotten a lot of questions as far as in the past at virtual tastings about kind of the way that you approach your trial blends. Do you look at, okay, well, last year I did this much new oak, so let's start with that and go somewhere else? Or do you always start with a blank slate? Is it blind? Kind of how do you approach from year to year, trying to dial it in? Yeah,
that's a good question. So, I do rely on my past experience to decide how much new oak you put in any given year that you put the wine in. And so, I usually have the goal of, with this wine, of being somewhere around 28%, maybe as high as 30%. We've gone up closer to that in some vintages. and usually with like our heritage vines, Zinfandel, for example, a little less. The single vineyard Zins, again, usually somewhere around 25 to 30% for those. Sometimes a little more. Like Spencer's, which is a bigger, kind of richer Zinfandel, the Spencer's Hills Zin, we've sometimes been as much as 32% new oak. So you kind of have to use some experience, because you can't add the oak quickly at the end if you thought you needed more, and you can't take it back out if you have too much. So you kind of have to have a goal there at the beginning when you're aging the wine. But then that said, we're like, especially with this Old Vine Zin, we're not using every barrel from these vineyards. So we can dial in the amount of new oak or the percentages of the grape varieties with each vintage. So when I'm approaching time for making a blend, like the Old Vine Zinfandel blend, for example, I'll have been going through, as these wines are aging, and tasting all the different components. And I will taste them so we have groups, or we call lots of wine. So it might be, from Buchignani, we might have picked one block a certain day, we keep that separate, and then another day we pick another block, keep that separate. So I'll have, from that vineyard, 2 or 3 different lots to choose from that have aged separately, and then they all have their own individual barrel treatment. So I'll taste the older barrels, I'll taste the barrels that were filled once before, so they're on their second fill and still are contributing some oak. I taste those, and then I taste all the different types of new oak individually. So let's say I've got this one lot of Buchignani. I might have at least 2, maybe 3 different types of new oak, and it might be French, and it might be Hungarian, it might be French and American, or whatever. And so we'll pick and choose just specific barrels that we liked, that I liked, and all of us liked the best for this wine. So I have all these notes. I give them some grades and descriptions, and then I go through that when we're going to put the trial blends together. We put some together on paper, and then we make it up, and then we taste them blind. So that means is we will have 3 or 4 wines. We put them all in a bag, so we don't know what they are. The bag has a number. You write the number down. You write your tasting notes, and then I'm tasting typically with our associate winemaker Brian Pruitt, and also our lab tech Laura Levin, and then we all discuss it. what do we think about this wine? And we all rank it and give it our votes. And then, we don't always agree. So, we might, we never argue, but we're pretty amiable, but we might defend our choice, and, or say why we think, or often, if I don't like a wine so much the first time around and somebody, Brian really likes it, I'll say, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to come back and taste that again. And, 9 times out of 10, I say, maybe I didn't give that wine a fair shake. So based on that, we come up with some ideas of what we want to tweak, maybe a little bit more of this wine or a little bit less of that, a little more new oak, whatever. And then we'll put together another round and we'll taste it. And, we go through several rounds of that before we kind of come to a consensus on this is the blend. And then the final step is you get it in front of Kim. So the boss has to give it the stamp of approval. And so we put that blend together, have her taste it. She gives it the thumbs up, and then we're ready to go.
Great. Well, we have just one quick question, and then we can move on to the next vintage. So Daryl was really paying attention and noticed that for the 2017, it was barrel aged for 15 months, but the 2018 was barrel aged for 14 months. So what impact does that 1 month have on the taste of the wine?
Honestly, just a difference of like a month doesn't typically have a huge impact. So the difference there probably had more to do with just practical reasons about when we were able to put the blends together, to pull them out of barrel and assemble them in tank. And that is the way it happens. So we, blend like this, we pick out all our barrels and lay them out, and then we, have actually a device that we put in the barrel, and we pump nitrogen in. We actually pressurize the barrel, and it goes into a little holding tank. And the idea is that we want to be gentle on the wine and not expose it to too much oxygen, so that nitrogen is a natural inert gas that just pushes the wine gently out of the barrel into a little tank, and then we have a nice gentle pump that moves it into a bigger tank, and we end up with the final blend. And so it's just kind of more of a practical thing. Now, if you got maybe a 3-month difference, that might start to show some difference where the wines when they came out of barrel would be a little more mature. But yeah, so you probably have to get up to somewhere between 3 to 6 months before you really start seeing significant differences. And even that, if it's spent a little more time in barrel, doesn't necessarily mean it's better or worse. It's kind of a stylistic thing. If you got out to another year, then the wine might start being a little tired. And in the past, I think in the old world, sometimes they might have aged wines longer than we do. So again, it was a matter of taste. Maybe they liked a more mature tasting wine, and so they left it in the barrel longer. I hope that answered that.
I think so. Well, then let's get on to the 2019.
Yeah, great.
And let us know in the chat if you have kind of any favorites. What, now we're going on to the 2019, so let us know what you like in there.
Okay, so taste the 2019. So, being the youngest, the youthful fruit really does stand out. I get some really nice, fresh sort of boysenberry, cranberry aromas, maybe a little hint of dark chocolate. Some nice spice in the aroma too. I got sort of like, for me, cumin is a very typical spice I get in Zinfandel. And then, there's a lot of other things that come, different black and white pepper, or, maybe some coriander. There might be some cinnamon or nutmeg sometimes. But I get a lot of nice peppery aromas and flavors in this wine as well. It's fairly full. I get some nice sort of boysenberry jam flavors in this. And because it's younger, the tannins are just a little bit rougher or stand out just a tiny bit. It's still very pleasant to drink. And especially if you had it with some good protein, that kind of will tame the tannin a little bit. But because it's young, it's got a little bit of that. And that you want a little bit of that in a young red wine because it helps it age. It'll help set it up for age. Those tannins are slowly soften over time. They act as an antioxidant, and they give the wine some nice mouthfeel. So I think this wine has some really good life ahead of it. So, comparison to some of the other things I've talked about between these wines. So the 2019 vintage was also a cooler vintage, maybe even a little bit cooler than 2018. And we started harvest later than the other previous two vintages. So, 2017, we started August 31st, September 8th for the 2018, and then September 12th for the 2019. And, we didn't finish until September 30th. So it actually was a 19-day span, just like the 2018, not by design, just happened that way, but a little later start. And it was lower overall sugar. So, whereas the 2017 was up around 26.8 bricks, this 2019 was down at 25.3. So, fairly significant difference in sugar, but yet when you taste the wines, and again, the 2017, I get more ripeness in that flavors, but the body and richness, I don't think is a big difference. So it's, I really like the balance of this 2019. As I said, 27% new oak, so very similar, and a very similar breakdown with French being the primary, then Hungarian, and then finally American. We used a little bit more Carignan in this vintage, so it was 3%, and that was because it was just really especially nice in this 2019 vintage, so bumped up a little bit higher percentage of that in the blend. And in terms of the time on the skins, it was very similar to 2018. So I talked about 2017 being very short time on skins. 2018 and 2019 were very much the same. So, somewhere between 12 to 17, maybe 18 days on the skins. And, again, like the 2018, the 2019 just needed a little more time to get that right extraction of color and tannin and just, to feel right in the mouth. When we're fermenting these reds, the fermentation goes pretty fast compared to white wine fermentation. And so it's very important that I taste the wine every day, every tank, every day. And so you can really get a sense of where the wine's going. That helps me determine how much time we're spending on pump overs, or if it's in a small fermentation bin where we're doing hand punch downs. We have a big stainless steel plate that we physically just push the skins down into the wine. So that'll help me determine how long we spend on those operations and how vigorously we do that, or how gently. And we have some different techniques we can use to be more gentle or more aggressive. And then just how many times a day. So typically we do it 2 times a day, but on occasion I might decide let's do it 3 times a day. And then when we get near the end of the fermentation, if we don't want to extract as much tannin anymore, and the color is kind of not there anymore in the skins to be extracted, then we don't spend as long a time on the pump over, and we might only do 1 a day, and it might get shorter and shorter until the day before we're going to press. We might do a pump over in the morning and then leave it. And then the next morning we come, drain the juice out, and then we start digging out the skins. So that's how it goes.
Perfect. So we did get a question actually just right now. Norman was asking, what does the Carignan add to the wine?
Well, so what I like about the Carignan is it's got a different flavors and qualities than Zinfandel. So it's fairly similar in the fruit qualities. You get some nice sort of boysenberry, cranberry, or even black cherry fruit, but it's kind of more pure fruit than the Zinfandel. Doesn't have as much spice. Typically doesn't have a lot of tannin, is a fairly round, smooth variety also. And honestly, I just like it because of the historic connection between that and Zinfandel. There's sort of a cool factor, if you want to say that. But I just really like that we have this unusual old vine block of Carignan, and I really like that this vineyard owner has kept it going. And by buying that fruit, we can keep it going. It's an important part of history. So so add some good color. Not like Petit Syrah, it's not that dark, but still a little bit of color, some really nice pure fruit, and a little softer tannin structure.
Great. Actually, Ruth was asking, Carignan originated in Spain. Is that correct?
I should know that.
I know. I'm not. So I feel like it's either. I feel like it's one of those northern Spain, southern France.
Because it is grown in Spain and
yeah,
in
depending on where the border was at the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
So
then
you're probably right, Ruth.
at one point or another, it was probably in Spain.
Yeah.
Is the vineyard breakdown percentage similar in 2019 as the others?
Yeah, pretty similar, but like I mentioned, is a little bit higher Carignan, so 3%, and then the Zinfandel is 78% in 2019, whereas 2017 was 76, and 2018 was 79, and then the Petit Syrah percentage for 2018 and 2019, it's both 19%. In 2017, it was a little higher, 22%. And those are, typically those percentages are things we do play around with in the trial blend. So we'll try some with more Petit Syrah or less, or more Carignan or less. And then of course the Zinfandel adjusted accordingly. And so we just, it's based on what we think works the best for that blend that year.
Great. Well, most of the questions have been centered around how to buy all the different vintages. So I think people must like it, whether they have
Good.
questions or not about it. So do you have any final thoughts that you want to share before we wrap it up, or any other comments on the wines?
I think the Old Vine is really special to me. I guess I would say that. Because of the privilege of working with these really old vineyards. And so I just, even before I was a winemaker, I thought it was really cool to be drinking these pre-prohibition vineyard wines and know that there's this great history out there. And I guess the other thing I would say is that's the one thing I really love about Zinfandel is I said this recently to someone writing an article about our heritage vine Zin, is that it's kind of the European immigrant success story, or the American success story, right? It's an immigrant that came to America from some obscurity because it wasn't, a major grape in Europe. That's where it came from, but it wasn't, extremely highly regarded like Cabernet Sauvignon, for example. But it came to America and hit it big, and it kind of almost became America's grape. And I really love that about Zinfandel, that that even though it didn't originate here, it made it big here, and maybe it just needed the right climate, the right soil. And I will say, I'm biased, but Dry Creek Valley, I have made Zinfandel from other places, and Dry Creek Valley is the place for Zinfandel. It's just exceptionally beautiful with the spice and the fruit together. You don't get that wonderful combination in a lot of other places. So you've come to the right place.
All right, and final question. We had one sneak in from Carol asking, noticing the 2019 tastes very young, which of course it would after tasting two older ones. What would you plan to eat with this, since it's a little bit younger than the other two?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, some good protein. So I would think something on the grill. Some nice grilled chicken thighs. Some maybe even something like sometimes we've got this cut from the Mexican supermarkets of beef. They call it arrachera, I think. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Maybe put a little bit of spice on it, not go too heavy on it, but a little bit of spice rub on it and grill that. And man, I think that would be really good with this wine too.
Well, speaking of spices, that was actually the perfect transition, because our September 16th virtual tasting event, which is not on our website yet, apologies for the delay on that, but we just want to make sure we're 100% dialed in before we put it up there. That is going to feature our tasting room manager, Ian Eddy, and our director of hospitality, Robert Kennard. If you love those two, they're an incredible duo. And they're going to be sharing their love of barbecue and smoking and using some of our K&D mercantile spices that we've developed, along with some of our Zinfandels that we're going to be tasting along with that. So they're going to be sharing kind of their recipes, their tips and tricks, how best to use the spices, how to pair them with Zinfandel. So that is going to be very fun, very yummy, very delicious, and very entertaining if you have ever spent much time in our tasting room around those two. So I hope you will join us. We'll be sending an email out for that within the next week or so. And it'll have an option for just the wines, just the spices. And so you'll have an opportunity to try some of those K&D mercantile things that we have been so excited about. We're also still planning another one in November. Again, we're just finalizing a date. We're excited. We're going to be partnering with a cheese company that we absolutely adore. So we'll be bringing back kind of a cheese and wine pairing. So stay tuned for that. And give us your feedback. You know, send an email to me. You can find me all over the website of how to get a hold of me. I'll throw my email in the chat. Let us know what you want to see. If you still want to keep doing this, we'll keep being here as long as you want to be here with us. So we love to hear your thoughts. We love to know what you want to taste. We love being able to see you, because since we don't get to see you in person all that much these days. So whatever we can do, let us know and we'll be here for you. So in the meantime, until then, stay safe, and we hope to see you very, very soon. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.